Thank you so much, Jorge. Good evening, everyone. Minelle, here we are. Here we are. It's a moment I've been waiting for such a long time. Just to kind of give everyone some kind of context, the first time Minelle told me about this book was in the midst of the pandemic in 2020. She sent me a sample of it, and or a sample of a proposal with a sample chapter, I believe, and over the years I've read bits and pieces of it, and heard.
For which I want to apologize profusely.
Well,
how many drafts of this thing have you seen over the years?
Quite a few, but it has shifted and changed over the years. But I feel like I've, in a way, I've accompanied you on this journey from proposal to. I remember the call you got me when you got a book contract with Doubleday, and it's like, you got how much? And
to which the answer was, that little.
And so I actually feel like this is a date that we've had for many years now, and I'm just so honored to be the person, because I don't know if anyone knows, but this is the official book launch of the book of May It Have a Happy Ending here in Vancouver. I've come a long way. I was living in Toronto at the time. You actually invited me to, or you were instrumental in me moving to Vancouver to take up the job at UBC. We'll talk about that later. But we're just going to dive in. So we're going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it to the floor for questions. And then, as Jorge said, there'll be some book signing. First of all, how are you feeling?
Can I say I'm really nervous? Is that okay?
If you are nervous, imagine how I'm feeling, because for those of you who have read the book, and Minelle made a living interviewing authors for a radio station, and there's so much in the book about what makes a good interview with an author. so as I was reading the book, knowing that I'll be doing this event, I started to take notes. Oh my God, I feel like a test at an exam. I have to pass this exam, but I'll do my best. We'll cover.
I know I'm in very good hands.
Thank you. The first thing I want to say is what a joy it is to read the final book, and what a gorgeous book. What a really stunning piece of writing. It's creative. It's moving. It actually touched me in place, deep down, and I think you and I know that I don't sort of drifted away from reading memoirs, and I just feel like, oh my God, what have I been missing all those years reading those really boring, hard nonfiction books. So I'm going to start first with asking you. I don't know how many in the audience have read the book, so I'm going to start asking you to set it up for us. For those who haven't read it, give us the elevator pitch first of all. This is like the question. It's like, what's your book about? But in a nicer way.
No, but it's a great question. Let me know if you can't hear me. First of all, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for coming. It is so nice to see so many familiar faces here, and I see some of my students and other people from my other life, everything from Dog Park to my CBC days. So thank you, everybody, for coming. This is a book I thought I would never write. In fact, I'm still surprised that I've actually penned this particular book. I'm used to writing academic books. So I never thought I'd write a memoir. It always felt very self-serving to me, like who would actually write a memoir? Especially, I think about my story as quite banal, but I'm beginning to realize that in the so-called banality of the story, there are particularities that speak to all of us in terms of how we understand grief. And I think we're going to talk more about that, so I won't go there. But basically, this is a story about how I was gaining a voice in radio when my mom was losing hers. Mere months after I was offered an incredible job hosting my own radio show at an amazing station led by our fearless leader, Don Schaefer, who is here in the crowd today. Sorry, Don, I have to point you out. Yeah, a little bit of a round of applause for Don would be really nice.
Everybody would know Don by the time they're done reading this book.
We'll get to that. But I had this amazing new job where I was given a platform to speak to authors and creatives about the work that they do. And just as I got the job, my mom called me and said, Betty, I have a cold sore in my mouth. I'm sure it's nothing. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, no. I repeated, oh, no, Mom, I'm sure it's nothing. I'm sure it's nothing. It turns out it was something, and something very serious, stage 4 tongue cancer. And I went through the whole range of emotions that you go through when you find out that somebody that you love has been diagnosed, and I'm sure far too many of us in this room have been there. But it was a fascinating and terrifying experience to be sitting in front, behind a microphone every day, amplifying the stories of all these incredible writers like Salman Rushdie and Adam Gopnik and David Cherryandi, while I was knowing that my mother's voice was being silenced. So what does it mean to actually think about, you know, this idea of watching the stories of your ancestors get buried in your mother's mouth while you're having the opportunity to have a larger voice in the world? And so I noticed that these two stories were butting up against each other, and I was curious about how I could braid them together. And that's how this story began to emerge in the world. But it also emerged for other reasons too. If you've experienced grief, and who of us in this room has not in some way, shape, or form, and if it hasn't touched you, I'm so grateful that it hasn't. But none of us really ever are taught how to grieve, to think about what it means to think about loss. It's not something we're taught in schools. We don't take courses on the dead and dying, for example. It's just something that we rarely talk about. And so I wanted to try to give a gift to other people who are working through their grief so that maybe they can experience some solace too. I always quote this line from Anne Michaels, who says, I see now that I must give what I most need. And this is the book that I wish that I had had when I was grieving. So that is, I'm trying to give a gift to individuals who are grieving too. Yeah.
I mean, I do think the book is a gift on so many levels. But let me start by the genre question. I mean, you're an academic, and we'll cover that in another question. But you could have approached that story in so many ways. You could have, fictionalized it. You could have written an academic study about grief, about mother-daughter relationship. But you chose a memoir. Can you, just in your own words, kind of tell us what drew you to this genre in particular? What did you find liberating, complicated, beautiful, oppressive, whatever it is?
So I'm going to do a bit of a shout out to, I see a lot of my students in the audience, which is so cool. And so forgive me, I hope this won't sound like one of the lectures in GRSJ 101, but I do want to say, I think all of you who have been in my classes knows that I'm obsessed with failure and what failure looks like and how do we think about not necessarily overcoming failure, but becoming more comfortable with failure in our lives. And after my mom died, I kind of just felt like a failure. I kept on berating myself for not doing more. Why wasn't I there more, not just when she was in the hospital, but before when she was healthy? And I think regret is such a big part of the experience of watching somebody you love go through all these stages of chemo or radiation, or just watching them experience trying to, find themselves in better health. So one of the things that I kept on thinking about was failure and how I felt like a failure. And then wouldn't you know it, because of chance and fate and luck, all these things, almost immediately after my mom passed, I got a letter from Dalhousie, which is where I did my undergraduate work. And they said, we'd like you to come back and give a talk talking about the things that you wish that you had known when you were an undergraduate, but like now, how do you feel about that? And I started writing it, and it became this like banal document, right? Like this ridiculous document talking about like, oh, I wish I'd studied more. And then something happened in the process of writing where I actually started talking about all the failure that I had experienced and how I needed to rethink failure. And it turned into this completely different presentation. And that's where this new kind of writing emerged, where I started talking about failure and how we need to rethink failure. And I presented it at Dalhousie, and it seemed like a couple of people liked it. And then I came home and continued to write. And a lot of you will know David Cherryandi in this room. He's one of the most extraordinarily generous writers. And I met with him over lunch at Tractor on 4th Avenue. A lot of you will know Tractor. And I said, yeah, I've done this writing. He said, let me take a look at it. And he read it, and he was like, Minelle, what are you doing? He's like, why are you doing all this academic work? There's nothing wrong with it. He goes, but you should think about taking this leap of faith. And because I really trust David, I took that leap of faith, and I just kept on writing, and it led to this.
But what is it about the memoir in particular that you chose as a...
You see, I can't even answer a question. I can ask the question,
yeah,
but I can't answer.
You try to avoid it, I know.
Try to avoid it.
That's like I'm pressing it back. I'm a journalist, like, answer the question, damn it.
The memoir itself, if you buy it or look at it, the memoir is deliberately non-linear. There's basically a story on every page, so every other page is a new story. And I wrote it that way because grief is non-linear, right? The way we experience grief, it's never a straightforward path from like being devastated to all of a sudden super happy. It doesn't work that way. You can get toppled by thinking that you see your mother across a room in like Simon's or something. You know what I mean? Like these kinds of experiences, they can just level you in a moment. And you never know when they're going to come out of the blue. So I kind of wrote it in this way, and every other page is a new story, so that you can pick it up at any time, just open up a page, and hopefully maybe find the story that speaks to you. So it's splintered, it's deliberately splintered, it's deliberately odd in its format. I do weird things with numbers all the way through it, which I also hadn't anticipated I would do, but I did.
Some beautiful drawings as well.
Oh, and the drawings. Thank you for bringing up the drawings, Kamal. Daisy, are you here tonight? Daisy, do you mind if you stand up for a minute? Can we all give a round of applause to Daisy, please? Thank you for being here. Daisy, who's here right today, actually offered all the beautiful illustrations in the book, which I think really adds something extraordinary to the text. Taking the time and energy to think about each chapter and how they actually come to life and are illuminated by your beautiful drawings. So I'm really grateful to you, Daisy. But that was the other part too, like to think about drawings in a book. Like when I told my editor, I have these gorgeous drawings that this talented student in my 101 class has offered. She's like, we don't normally do that in a memoir. But when they saw the drawings, they couldn't help but be compelled, and I really feel like they just add something so much more to the text. So really, it's unusual. There's no question about it in the style, but I'm really happy with that because I didn't want to just do a series of like straightforward chapters. And I guess that's part of what my project is too as an academic, to think about doing things a little bit differently, and that's the form of it too.
To see your editor's face when you told her you want a page like this, 2 pages like this with nothing but random numbers in sort of semicircles there.
You know, it's funny, this one page, this is a page called Apocalyptic Numbers. I spend a lot of time talking about numbers in the text and how I rely on counting as a way to find safety in the world. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about how to illustrate that. I mean, I could talk about it, but it's another thing to actually see the numbers on the page. And when you get to that part in the book, that'll make a lot more sense, I think, to you. But that page, really, my editor was like, really? That's what you want to do? Yeah.
Beautiful design, though. So we're going to get into some of the heavier stuff here. And I mean that in the best possible sense and not in a sadomasochist sense, that pain permeates the book, physical pain, emotional pain. And yet I found that one of the most beautiful aspects of the book, and your ability to talk through, try to explain, try to rationalize to yourself, to the reader, and you're in the habit of talking to the reader all the time. And I'm really curious about how you find the beauty in and out of pain. You keep saying the body remembers the trauma, I assume, but tell us about that connection between pain and beauty, or resilience, if that's a better word.
Yeah, I mean, I think if any of you have witnessed a friend, partner, parent who has been in pain, it is a very difficult experience to even think about how to articulate. And I guess part of what I was trying to speak about in the book is if you've known anybody who's had oral cancer or tongue cancer or head cancer, you know it is among the most painful of cancers. And I had to try to make a decision, was I going to share all that with the reader? Because I didn't want to, part of my project in this book was not to create more trauma porn in the world. I didn't want to create yet another story of the trauma that BIPOC go through. That wasn't my project. But it was more to speak about how can we think about what the body shares with us through the experiences of pain? What does pain teach us? And interestingly enough, as soon as my mother was diagnosed, I mean, I was completely in denial. She's going to be fine. She's going to be okay. Everything's going to be all right. We're going to get her to the treatment. But trying to get treatment in today's day and age is really difficult. They kept on putting things off, putting things off, putting things off. Finally, we had no other recourse, and we actually had to take my mother to Germany to find some, and we didn't have to take her, but we chose to take her to Germany for some alternative care. But while I was there, I developed a terrible case of shingles. And if you know what shingles is, if you've experienced it, it is outrageously painful. but my body was trying to voice something that I couldn't even speak to myself, right? My body was saying, you're going through all this trauma and you're not even ready to articulate that using your voice. So I was trying to think through all the different ways I understood pain in that moment, not just my own mother's pain, but my own pain as well, as we were both experiencing it together at very different levels, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that conflation between your mother's experience and your own of shingle was quite striking in the book. You sort of anticipated my question about trauma porn, so I'm gonna pass that on a little. Which brings me to grief. This is a memoir in many ways. I mean, this is a multifaceted memoir. Like I don't know if I can pinpoint one aspect of it, but if I can, grief, sort of runs through its pages. The loss, obviously, the loss of your mother is a story that you kind of introduce, hold back, introduce again, and do deep dive into. First of all, what do you want the audience in the room to know about Farida, your mom, which I think I mentioned is also the name of my sister, and in Arabic means one of a kind. What can you tell us about this one of a kind woman?
I still can't believe that, like this name, like we have this name in common, right? Which is really beautiful. So I'm so grateful that you would share that with me. I'm always struck, there's so many books now about like mother-daughter relationships, right? So many memoirs out there, and some of them are really beautiful, but others leave me cold, and I know that's a weird thing to say for someone who's just written a book about a mother-daughter relationship. But this book is really not about our relationship per se, it's more about the ways in which we understand grief and loss and love. Because one of the things I was really deliberate to write through in this book is my mother was not a perfect person. She made a lot of mistakes in her life in relationship to her other relationships, but that is not the story I chose to tell in this book. This book is about thinking through how it is that I dealt with the loss of my mother in my world, and thinking about how it is that we all grapple with grief in many different multifaceted ways. And that was really part and parcel of my project. But there were a lot of things about her that I absolutely loved. And one of the things that I talk about in the book, she was a Montessori teacher. And even now I notice I still talk about her in the present tense, like she is a Montessori teacher. And I talk about how you always tend to fall back on the colonial present when talking about like the past of your parent. So I try to talk about that in the book a little bit. But one of the things that I really loved about her, and I talk about this in the book, if there's anybody here that speaks Farsi, there's this phrase that we call ame. We use ame for aunt. In my family, we use this term. And my mother loved the exquisite beauty of things. She just loved having beautiful things around her. Her nails were always painted perfectly. She always had the most beautiful clothing. It was just something that really mattered to her. And my cousin said, this is because Faride was so committed to ambiance. She loved the idea of ambiance in the world, so playing with the idea of ame. But these are just one of the things that I really loved about her and something I really miss about her.
I feel like I need to do what you guys in radio do, what I tell you to talk a little bit more. Tell us more about, tell us about her journey, because she has had a remarkable journey in life.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key themes in this book is obviously the fact that I'm Indian and Iranian, right? And the fact that I come from these two completely different worlds. And I talk about the fact that I'm actually kind of like an existential nightmare, like the fact that I have these two complicated, complex diasporic pasts, coursing through my body, given that if you know anything about partition in Pakistan, you know that the fact that I even exist, it's a minor miracle, given that my mother was Muslim and Iranian and that my father was Indian and Hindu. So my mother has really traveled a lot in her life to get to where she has come to. See, I'm still doing present tense in Canada. But she grew up in Iran, but then tried to finish medical school. That never finished for her. Spent some time in England, and then came to Canada eventually, to like what I guess what's called like the third and final continent, as Jhumpa Lahiri talks about. But her journey has been very difficult, and it was only through picking up a lot of papers and archives and stories and letters that I discovered just how painful it was for her, discovering that she had been through different forms of assault, the trauma that she's been through in herself. it was really difficult finding out about that later on in life too. Did that answer it? Probably not.
Okay. I'll leave it at that. Well, I think we reach a point where I would love you to read something from the book. And selfishly, I pre-selected what piece Minelle should read. In a book full of exquisite prose, this section just knocked me out. I think it's gorgeous, and I think it deserves to be read out loud. So take it away.
The may it have a happy ending part, right? That's what we do, yeah. This is from the title of the book. So this is the one, and it's almost exactly in the middle of the book. So may it have a happy ending. When I returned to our house the first day in the after, I started rummaging around and found the usual objects I expected to see. Silly souvenirs from my childhood, faded report cards. But what surprised me the most were the extraordinary number of prayer books. They were everywhere, hidden away in darkened and dusty corners of the house, under bed pillows even. She must have slept with them. Buried under old scarves in the hall closet. Some small, some large. Some Qurans were big maroon bricks. One small, silver, the size of a charm on a bracelet. When I pried the tiny book open, there was a tinier book inside. I would learn later from the internet that this charm was a tawiz, a talisman of sorts that is worn or hung somewhere to ward off harm and bring in good fortune. I picked up all the prayer books to take to the mosque later. I refused to be sentimental on this point, but one prayer insisted on fluttering out of her book of du'as as I was lugging them down the stairs. It was all but 6 words, scrawled on a slip of paper with garden basket printed on it. You know, from one of those pads you used to get in the mail sometimes, a promotion for the local grocery store. Back when we all kept pads of paper near our telephones attached to the wall. Maybe you remember. On it, scrawled in her beautiful handwriting, Salamun kalum mina Rabbin Rahim. And under it, the translation, may it have a happy ending. What does this mean, this small, simple prayer? I shuffled the words around in my mind and in my mouth, reciting them out loud the way my mother might have done. Happy ending, may it have. Ending, happy have it may. Whichever way I altered their order, nothing shifted the palpable power of those 6 words. Was it happy for you, Mom? Was it okay at the end, beginning, middle? Could this be the prayer for all of us, the hope that all our endings are happy, that even if the beginnings are rough and tumble, perhaps the ending could be less full of freight, grief, struggle? I will never know what the ending was like for her, but the morphine injections and the moans told me more than I ever wanted or needed to know. I read that prayer every night now when I say my namaz, taking out the tiny scrap of paper, opening it up with deep sanctity. It's worn now, and I don't want to lose it, damage it. The hope so deeply haunting in those few words. You don't want to leave things unfinished. We hear this so much when someone is about to die. You have to sort out the loose ends. You have to say all the things you have to say. But what is this obsession with endings, tidy endings, clean, neat knots? Life is a messy series of unfinished things. We can't be this afraid of unfinished endings. May it have a happy ending, because endings are a product we have created. Nothing really ends. Nothing really ever begins either. Because whoever decided that beginning and endings were opposites was wrong. In every ending, a new beginning. And there is no such thing as a happy ending during end times, which it feels like we are all in now anyway. I'm trying to write for you a happy ending during end times, which is, of course, impossible, but also cannot be impossible. It just can't.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And it really is reminds me how, in many ways, and you describe the book as a prayer, and I see it in many ways as a book of wishes and dreams. Your very name, Minelle, would you like to tell the audience who don't know what Minelle means?
So my name has a really interesting story. Those of you who have seen the book and know me, my name is spelled Minelle, but my name has this really interesting history. So when my parents moved to Canada in the late 60s, and I was born in 1971, they wanted to have a name that would resonate with the culture that my mom wanted to have like an Arabic name, but there were many options that came to pass, and some of the people in the room know some of those options that were available to me, that were offered, I guess, to my mom. But eventually, they came up with the name Minelle, which means "wish come true" in Arabic, coarsely translated according to what
That's true.
Yeah. But they were worried that in Canada people wouldn't know how to spell it. So my dad said, "Well, why don't we make it look like Michelle, like a French Canadian name, Michelle?" So that's how I got the spelling of my name. It's Minelle. But it's been a really interesting journey for me, having the burden as well as the real gift of this name, because this idea of being a wish come true, with it became all these other burdens of the kind of person they wanted me to be. This idea, again, of being like the striving immigrant. They wanted a child who was going to be a doctor and a lawyer. And the running joke in my house always was, well, you became a doctor, just the wrong kind of doctor. What are you going to do with a PhD in geography? You're going to read maps the rest of your life? And I still can't even read a map properly. Yeah. So, I mean, didn't really serve the purpose.
I bet your father was more disappointed than you did when you didn't get into Harvard, right? He's probably...
Yeah. I have a very painful story about my dad applying to Harvard Business School, and how dejected he felt when he didn't get in. And then I'm sure a lot of you have that experience where your parents encourage you to fulfill the dreams that they had for themselves through you. Always a winning combination, as you know. There's no way you can ever win that one. So I applied to Harvard, and I actually got an interview, which is not a big deal. Everybody gets an interview if you apply to Harvard, for the record. But when I actually got my interview, they asked me a question about Persia, and I said, "Where's that?" And because I was taught in my house, when you're Iranian, you don't talk about Persia. Persia is a rug. You are not a rug, you are a human being, and don't use this colonial kind of way of talking about a country that we love. Now, I know there's many interpretations around the ways in which we talk about Persian identity, and I talk about that in the book, but I saw the look in the recruiter's eyes when I said, "Where's Persia?" and I knew it was game over right then. There was no way I was getting in. So I asked the very wrong question in that particular interview. And that was a really wake-up moment for me. But I also saw the disappointment in my father's face when I didn't get in as well.
Well, I think every immigrant's son knows that look. I'm sure that, like, looking at the room, I'm sure that will resonate. So many people in this room probably know you from your journalism, whether it's your print journalism, the radio, and obviously from the university, but they may not necessarily know that you're trained as a geographer. And throughout the book, you do talk about identity and geography, or the geography of grief. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that training in geography, whether it's an academic training or just sort of amateur, what you love about geography in general? Because once academia gets into it, it ruins the joy of whatever you're studying. But just tell me about how that influences the literary choices you make, the stories you tell, the physical spaces or the imagined spaces that you recreate in your nonfiction.
I love that question. And thank you for even bringing that up, because everybody here in this room who knows me knows how much I love geography and how much I can talk about geography. So how much time you got? You're going to be having to be here for a couple more hours?
Actually, 10 minutes, to be honest.
Yeah, no, don't worry. No, I can keep this quick.
To the end of the interview.
So for me, everything I do is about geography. And when Don so generously offered me the job at Roundhouse, one of the things we spent a lot of time talking about is, like, what was the focus of this radio show going to be? And for me, the question has always been not where I feel out of place, because that's been the most popular trope that keeps on coming up and up over and over again for people of color, this idea that we don't belong anywhere, that we have no place to call home, particularly for mixed race people. But I was more interested in finding out where people felt in place, where they created a sense of home and belonging. And that is directly my training is all about thinking through the idea of social, cultural, feminist geography. And yes, there is a thing. Bonnie, I'm looking at you. You know all about this. So it's just, for me, it's the most comfortable academic home through which I can explore questions of identity and a splintered way of being in the world for me. So the radio show became this place. The show was actually called Sense of Place. And I actually wanted to interview people about where they felt at home and where they belonged. And it opened up a whole different space where we didn't have to just linger in spaces of trauma porn and all this deep sadness and despair, but rather, what are the spaces we can create that are filled with optimism and joy? And for me, that's all about not asking this question, where are you from? This intrinsically geographical question that we get asked time and time again as people of color. But in the words of the great scholar Catherine McKittrick, I think the more interesting question is, where do you know from? Where is the knowledge coming from that speaks to who you are and what you can become? And what about those complex diasporic threads that braid together to offer you a kind of opportunity to think about what you can be in the world? So for me, that's why I love geography so much.
I see. And I mean, I love the fact that also the memoir sort of unfolds over different places, not just times, but places. Toronto, Frankfurt, Vancouver, going back and forth. I hope you had like a frequent flyer miles, because you were traveling back and forth between Toronto and Vancouver so much to see your mom, and then obviously for Bruce and Cole. You know, I love that breadth of space in which you allowed the story to kind of unfold.
And you know, I do that deliberately, right? I mean, when you look at the book, you'll see there's a lot of white space in this book, and that was really deliberate, right? I mean, I could have written it just line by line, but because like on some pages, there's only 1 or 2 lines. And that was really deliberately because I wanted the story to breathe.
Right. I think that's really, you know, the white space, the empty space is a kind of a portal for us to travel through and put our own stories. And I mean, obviously a book like this, like as I was reading it, I mean, I could, because I know you, I could see you, I could imagine. The first time we met was on your show, A Sense of Place, in 2016. You probably don't remember that because you interviewed far more important people since then.
You're the most important.
Please. But just kind of, I'm slightly getting conscious about time, and I just have a few more questions. I want to move to something that's just slightly different. And, you know, for those who haven't read the book, they may be surprised to see that it's also a book of ghosts, of visitations, haunting. I really felt this was a haunting book, but not in a haunted house sense of thing. But there is lots in it in the way we commune with the past. We try to commune with our dearly departed, with worlds that we knew and have vanished. I mean, the way you talk about Toronto, for example, you know, that's just my home. I feel like that's almost historical fiction in a way, because that Toronto doesn't exist, like in a way has changed so much. So tell us a little bit about that. There are two sort of strands in the book. There is sort of a certain something about ghosts, something ghostly, something haunting, but also fate, unknown, the things that happen in a space that the mind cannot necessarily comprehend, the spiritual side, maybe, if you will.
I think one of the things I was trying to make sense of in this book is you know, when I say I'm not a religious person, that's such a loaded thing to say. I mean, I think we all have different relationships to thinking about spirituality and faith. Some of us have nothing at all, but others have different connections or degrees with spirituality. And I guess I was trying to think about how we can make the secular more sacred in this book. How do we understand our relationships to things, to people in place? And for me, one way that I latched on to desperate hope when my mother was sick, I was just searching everywhere, was through the presence of signs. So I thought if I saw something, if I saw the number 7, maybe she was going to get better. But if I saw the number 13, oh my God, something terrible was going to happen. But of course, the terrible thing had already happened, right? And I developed this reliance on feathers as a sign. And that's why the feather is such an important motif all the way through the book. When I was on one of my many trips from YVR to Toronto, I saw this beautiful little feather necklace, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's a sign, maybe she's going to be better. And I wore that feather necklace like I would never dare take it off the entire time I was in the hospital with her. I just thought this was going to be the thing to make her better. So I started relying on signs like that in order just to cling to some kind of desperate hope. But the other thing I did, and maybe some of you will have this experience too, is I paid a lot of attention to my dreams at that time and thinking about what my dreams were telling me. And then when I didn't get the dreams, I'd be like, this is wrong, I should be getting the right dream to make myself feel better. And then when she died, I wasn't having dreams about her, and I was getting really upset. Like, people told me I was gonna dream about her. Where's my requisite dream? And the dream did come, and I talk about that later in the book. But it's the ways in which I came to rely on those experiences for some kind of hope. And again, it was just my offering. And that's why the book is called A Prayer. It is my prayer to all of you that I hope you will find some solace and reassurance in your own life, maybe through dreams or signs or through a conversation with a friend, because grief should not be something that you experience alone. It's better shared with other people that way.
Mm-hmm. It's such a beautiful section when you talk about that dream, and then you recreate a moment that your mother has shared with you about her dream of her own mother. But for those who want to find out, you have to buy the book and read it. So we'll leave that for now. I'm going to end my part of the evening by sort of addressing the elephant in the room in many ways. This is a book about voice. This is a book about sound and silence, but also a book about the fact that your mom had tongue cancer of all things and was unable to clearly articulate and sometimes communicated through murmurs or mumbles. And here you are, expected to go on the radio and be that completely articulate and present interviewer. I feel like this book is also kind of like a musical composition with many movements, and two of them are sound and silence. I'd like you just to take us into that piece of composition.
Oh my God, that's like music right there with that question. How'd you do that, man? See, I can never ask a question as beautiful as that. That's so beautiful. So one of the things I'm really interested in are binary oppositions, which won't surprise a lot of you because I'm mixed race. So I'm always interested in how do we think about who gets to identify as mixed race, for example? What do we think about as two different identities coming up against each other? And so one of the things I wanted to explore in this book is the relationship between sound and silence. And we always think about sound as something that's loud and or something that we always hear, and silence is something that is just invisible and not present. But in watching my mother get sick, I started to realize that silence has a voice of its own, that I just wasn't paying attention to the silences that were there. And in that experience, I realized, and even doing the interviews with people, that even when people weren't speaking to me, they were telling me so much, but I just wasn't paying attention. So that's the kind of thing that I'd like to think I became a better radio host as a result of, unfortunately, experiencing all this grief. But I also think that it taught me a lot more about just how much I was speaking all the time as a professor, thinking I always had the answers. But again, this is a book about questions and answers, how I realize now I have so many more questions than answers. And I'm really trying now more in my life to listen to the people around me rather than foisting what it is that I think I know upon them. So.
And I think you say in the book that, the way radio works is it has two tools, sound and silence. And I think that definitely sort of integrated here. Minelle, I could talk to you forever, but selfishly, I would love to, but we have 15 minutes that would like to open it up to the audience for questions. Please keep your questions brief and shout it out, and I'll do my best to paraphrase it or repeat it so that it's captured in the recording. I'll start with this section. Any questions here? Minelle, your students better have a question.
And it's okay if you don't have one. It's okay.
Okay, all right, we'll move to this section then.
Or you could just talk to me after.
People are being shy. All right, go ahead, please.
My question is, how do you find the courage to talk about something so personal?
All right, I have to repeat. How do you find the courage to talk about something so personal?
Thank you for that question. Blind naivete, how about that? I mean, I won't pretend that I wasn't terrified to put this book out in the world, because there are a lot of stories in there that I thought I would never share. But I also thought if I didn't do this, then I would be doing my mother's memory a disservice too, as well as the stories of my ancestors, right? So I wanted to try to give back something to the people, particularly like my students who have been so generous with me. The least I could do was give this story back in some way. And also, I think there's a real gift in sharing vulnerability, right? I think when we're vulnerable with people that we can trust, it opens up a whole new space for a beautiful conversations. So that's one of the reasons why I did it. Talk to me in 6 months, I might feel differently.
Yes, at the back there.
I'm
Sorry,
so
what was
happy
this?
to see you. Any
was that?
regrets? Again, talk to me in 6 months. I mean, the whole experience of writing the book has been so wonderful. It's opened me up to the whole world of book publishing that I knew nothing about in this particular trade realm. I mean, do I have regrets about certain stories that I wish that I had? Like when I did the audiobook, I read it, I was listening to myself and I was like, oh, I should have used a different word here. Oh, I hate this paragraph. But overall, I don't think I have any regrets. But as I said, talk to me in 6 months.
Have you experienced the memoirist guilt just yet?
No, what's that?
Well, there's when I wrote my first book, Sandra Martin, the Globe and Mail writer, told me, it's like, wait until like your book is out in the world and you start feeling about, because a memoir is an act of betrayal in many ways, because you betray confidences and stuff.
Why did I ask you to do this?
Nobody told you this?
Oh my
Nobody told you this? Okay, well, not all memoirs, but there is an assumption that you're telling stories that don't just belong to you, but belong to other people, and there's the questions of permission, but she said, like, have you experienced the memoirist guilt? And I said, not yet. And then just as the book came out into the world and my family started reading it, I started to feel a little bit of nervousness. And the thing is, I could not have written that memoir while my mom was alive. I also waited until she was gone to have it in the world, because I just didn't want her to read it. Yeah.
And then I think about what your book, your memoir, Intolerable, did for so many people in terms of helping them see themselves, who they could be in the world. I mean, your memoir offered so many people strength, but I can also understand that point of view too, because I don't know if I could have written this book if my mother, obviously I couldn't have written this book if my mother was still alive.
Yeah.
And I don't know if she would have given me permission to tell some of the stories that I told. But the best piece of advice I got in writing this book came from Dani Shapiro, who is a very famous memoirist. She said to me, you've got to come across as the biggest asshole in your book. And if you do that, that will save you from a lot of the grief that you might feel later. And I hope I have accomplished that with this book.
You're certainly very hard on yourself in this book, I'll tell you that one. Please, this question, and then we'll take one at the back. Please go ahead.
So you said that the writing of the book was not linear, or you said that grief is not linear, and the book is not linear. And my question is about the writing process, and whether that was linear, or whether you found you were moving your stories all over the place, to put it in a different order.
Okay.
Did it all get written?
So sorry, I do have to repeat. I heard you loud and clear, but for the recording, whether the writing followed the nonlinear sort of nature of the book, your process for writing.
Yeah, no, thanks, Karen. This is a nice question. The writing completely was non-linear. So I'd write in a coffee shop if I could in the morning, or sometimes I'd write like at midnight, and all the chapters came up at different times depending on where I was and what was going on in my life. I'm not one of those people that sits down every day from like 7 until 9 and writes. I'm not able to do that. I literally just found snatch moments when I could write, and what that meant is there was no clear path. I let the stories emerge the way they were going to emerge, and they literally just came to me at different times, and I trusted in that journey. But what it meant at the end, my poor editor had 350 stories on the floor of her living room, and she says, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to make sense of all these stories? We eventually managed to find a path, like some kind of path for the reader, but it took a long time. Yeah.
Question at the back, and then I'll come to the front. Yes, please.
This book is obviously about your relationship with your mother, and I think that is such an intimate connection, and it's something that I think all of us have for good or ill. But I'm curious what the process of writing this book looked like for your connection with yourself.
Process of writing the book for connection with yourself.
And with my son, right? Too, right? Cole, I feel like do you want to answer that? I'm just teasing. I wouldn't do that to you. I speak a lot about my relationship with my son because he taught me a lot about grief and how to think about how to heal from grief. I think these ancestral threads braid through the story, and one of the things I speak a lot about is intergenerational trauma and how we can break the cycle. And you know, I owe a lot to my son, who's taught me a lot about how to break some of these cycles, so I'm very grateful to him. So one of the interesting things about the story is my mom did get to know my son a little bit, but it's one of the biggest regrets is that she obviously didn't get a chance to get to know him as obviously he's getting older. So I guess that's a very roundabout way of saying in the book I'm trying to address questions of intergenerational trauma by talking about a different relationship that I'm trying to forge with my son by breaking the patterns of the relationships I had with both my parents in the past.
I think I saw a hand here. Oh, yes, please.
How do you think your mother would feel if she read your memoir?
It's a nice question.
How do you think your mom would feel if she read
I don't know,
it?
you know, like a couple of my really good friends who have read it have said, I think your mother would be really proud. But you know, I don't know, Frank, how she would feel. I hope she would be proud. You know, I can't possibly know, but I hope she would be. Yeah.
Yeah, she's a very, she's a very resilient woman. That's the story that I'm reading from the book. Yeah. Yes. Oh, we're getting more questions. Excellent. We have a few more minutes. Okay. We'll go kind of the gentleman. Go ahead. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the audiobook, reading the audiobook, because this book is about you finding your voice and the whole experience with radio. Was it intimidating to read the audiobook? Was it like a victory lap?
Right. The audiobook.
Yeah, the audiobook. Well, I really wanted the great Marty Strong to do my audiobook, but I hear he wasn't available. This is Marty Strong, who I used to work with at Roundhouse, is here, and he's got like the best voice in the world. But like with the audio, I thought it was going to be easy peasy because of radio. It was not. Aaron, my sound engineer, is behind me, and he knows we spent how many days in that edit, like going over and over the words and all the pronunciation. It was really hard and really boring and really like agonizing to see all the mistakes I'd made in the book and go, why did I write it this way? So I learned a lot about myself, and it was also really hard to do it without crying at certain points too, because it's one thing to write it, it's another thing to read it out loud. And that part really affected me too. Yeah.
Please. Yeah, please.
Any of your students knows that you talk about radical reciprocity all the time. So I'm wondering, how can your audience read your book in a way that extends reciprocity and generosity towards you?
Okay, I'm going to ask you to paraphrase this because I know your idea of radical reciprocity.
That's such a great question. Just the last sentence.
Well, how can the reader read your book in a way that extends a reciprocity and generosity back towards you?
That's like such a beautiful question. Thank you, Lila, for that. I mean, in regards to me, I would say, I mean, if in fact a reader approaches my book and takes something out of it that offers them some kind of solace and grace for them to see the beauty of themselves in their own lives, then I will feel like my job has been done here, right? So that if the reader can recognize themselves in some way, that will be the gift for me, right? And then out of that process of reading, and I think a lot of you in this room who have been my students know, who have heard sections of this book or have read sections of this book, it has allowed us to develop a different kind of relationship, for which I'm really grateful. So that's the joy of writing the book, is it has allowed the beauty of a new kind of relationship to emerge between me and the reader. And then maybe you can extend that to other people by having faith that they will read it the same way too, or explore it in a different way too. Yeah.
Okay, final question, actually. Please.
Hi.
My question for you was, you talk about a couple different themes in the book, like silence, and I'm just wondering, did you have a shift in perspective after you finished writing the book, or while you're writing the book, as opposed to maybe before writing the book, and how you view your mother's death or some of the other themes that you speak about?
Thanks, Sturgis. That's such a nice question too. The whole point of this book was, like, I wrote this book during pandemic when I was alone writing and chose to live a much more kind of cloistered life for myself. But the irony now is now I have to talk about it and do all these things all the time. So all of a sudden I have to be a lot, like that division between silence and sound has really become really stark for me. So I've really had to come into my own and recognize that now I have to speak in a whole new way. And I can't hide behind asking the questions anymore. Now I have to answer the questions. And that's going to be an interesting journey for me in terms of this next stage of this tour. Because this is the first thing I'm doing before I go across the country. So I'm going to have to get used to speaking in a whole new way. And I'm kind of terrified and also looking forward to it.
You're doing great. And with this, we come to the end of this conversation. Minelle will be signing books right at this table. Jorge, thank you very much for facilitating this conversation. Really appreciate it. Minelle, I just want to end by saying thank you for gifting us this beautiful book. It's a book that I think will resonate with readers from different walks of life, but also it's a book that has helped me also deal with my own grief, as I know I've had a lot of losses in my family recently, and it's just helped me understand grief and expand my vocabulary of grief. So thank you for this beautiful gift. Please give Minelle a round of applause. And with this, the book is officially launched. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say thank you, everybody, for coming. It is so nice to see so many familiar faces. And I'm looking forward to talking to a lot of you now. Thanks again. And thank you, Kamal.